The year was 2157, when Earth finally launched its first true deep space vessel. The HSS Defiance wasn't particularly large or impressive by the standards humans would later come to understand. It stretched just under 400 meters from bow to stern, its hull a patchwork of titanium alloys and carbon composites that reflected the sun's light as it departed from the orbital shipyards above Mars. Captain June Kim stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching as the blue marble of Earth grew smaller on the main view screen. He was 43, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who smiled often, despite carrying heavy responsibility. His crew numbered just 120 souls, all that humanity could spare for this first, tentative reach toward the stars. "Navigation confirms we're on course, Captain," said First Officer Day Park, her voice steady despite the historic nature of their mission. "Plasma fusion drive performing at 97% efficiency." Kim nodded. "Tell engineering they've outdone themselves. Again." The Defiance had been built with every scrap of innovation humanity could muster, the culmination of a century of theoretical physics finally made practical. Yet, as they would soon discover, it was barely enough to earn them a seat at the galactic table. 3 weeks into their journey beyond the solar system, the sensors picked up something impossible. Artificial structures in deep space, moving, in formation. First contact wasn't supposed to happen this way. Humanity had been broadcasting signals for decades, hoping for a response, not expecting to simply bump into galactic civilization on their first outing. "Unknown vessels approaching, sir," reported Lieutenant Su Jin at Tactical. Her fingers flew across her console. "I count 17 distinct ship classes. Largest is, sir, it's nearly 4 kilometers in length." Kim swallowed hard. "Open all frequencies, standard greeting protocol." What followed was humanity's rather unceremonious introduction to the Galactic Concordat, a coalition of 17 spacefaring species that had been trading, fighting, and making peace with one another for millennia while Earth developed in isolation. The Concordat representatives agreed to meet aboard their diplomatic vessel, the Light of Ancient Wisdom. Kim led a small team to the meeting, trying not to gape at the cavernous, gravity-defying architecture of the alien ship. The delegation was seated at a massive round table when 7 representatives of different species entered. Their translator devices had barely finished adapting to human language when the mockery began. Ambassador Tay, a tall, blue-skinned being, with 4 arms and elongated features, examined the human delegation with what could only be described as barely contained amusement. "So these are the newcomers? Your vessel's propulsion system operates on plasma fusion principles? How quaint." Another representative, a being made of what appeared to be crystalline structures, made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "Their entire ship could fit in our waste reclamation section." "Barely worth cataloging this system," Tay said, fiddling with a device that projected holographic star charts. "Though I suppose we should update the records to note an emerging intelligence." Kim felt his face grow warm but kept his expression neutral. Earth had sent its best and brightest, people who had trained their entire lives for this mission, only to be treated like children who had wandered into an adult's conversation. "We're here to learn," Kim said simply. "Earth hopes to establish diplomatic and trade relations with your Concordat." This prompted more barely concealed laughter from several representatives. Only one, a being with feathered skin who introduced herself as Representative Gia, showed any real interest. "Your species developed spaceflight without outside influence?" she asked, her tone suggesting actual curiosity rather than mockery. "Yes," Kim answered. "We've been exploring our own solar system for over a century." "Remarkable," Gia said. "Most species require guidance, or at least observation, of others' technology before attempting such advances." Ambassador Tay waved a dismissive hand. "They won't last long out here. The void is unforgiving to the unprepared. I'd wager they'll retreat to their homeworld within a standard cycle." Others at the table began placing actual bets on how quickly humanity would give up their space exploration efforts. Kim maintained his composure, though he noticed his science officer, Dr. Han, clenching his jaw tightly enough that a muscle twitched visibly. We request permission to observe concordate operations, Kim said, cutting through the side conversations. As humanity's representatives, we seek to understand galactic protocols and customs. The representatives exchanged glances before Tay responded with a careless shrug of his upper set of shoulders. Permission granted. Your vessel may follow our diplomatic convoy to the Proxima station. Try to keep up. Our slowest ships move at twice your maximum velocity. As the human delegation returned to the Defiance, Lieutenant Su Jin couldn't contain her frustration. They treated us like we're primitive. Did you see how that crystal being looked at our uniforms like we were wearing animal skins? Captain, Kim stopped in the corridor, turning to address not just Su Jin but the entire returning party. Remember this feeling, he told them quietly. Remember every dismissive glance, every mocking word. But don't let it cloud your judgment or your mission. We're here to represent Earth, to learn what we can and to find our place among the stars. If that means swallowing our pride for now, so be it. Dr. Han nodded slowly. They underestimate us. That could be an advantage someday. Let's hope it never needs to be, Kim replied, though something in his eyes suggested he didn't believe that would be the case. For now, we observe and learn. The Defiance may be small by their standards, but she's carried us farther than any humans have gone before, and she's not done yet. Little did any of them know how soon and how dramatically the galaxy's perception of humanity's lone ship would change. 3 months into their diplomatic mission, the crew of the Defiance had settled into an uneasy routine. They followed the concordate ships from system to system, attended meetings where they were largely ignored, and gathered whatever scraps of information the alien species deemed appropriate to share with emerging intelligences. Captain Kim maintained a dignified presence despite the constant undercurrent of condescension, while the crew worked tirelessly to upgrade their systems using what little they could learn through observation. "I've never felt so simultaneously impressed and insulted," said Engineer Minji Park one evening in the ship's mess hall. She pushed her food around her plate with little enthusiasm. "Their technology is centuries beyond ours, but they treat us like we're children playing with sticks and rocks." Communications Officer Lee nodded in agreement. "Yesterday, one of the Taurian junior officers asked me if our ship still used combustible fuel. When I explained our plasma fusion drive, he laughed and asked if we'd invented the wheel yet, Doctor." Han, who had been quietly listening, looked up from his datapad. "They see what they expect to see. Their arrogance blinds them to our potential." The conversation might have continued along these familiar lines of frustration had the ship's alert system not suddenly blared to life. The mess hall's lighting shifted to red, and Captain Kim's voice came over the intercom. "All senior officers to the bridge immediately. This is not a drill." When they arrived, they found the bridge in controlled chaos. The main view screen showed the concordate diplomatic vessel, light of ancient wisdom, surrounded by smaller ships darting in complex formations. "Status report," Kim demanded as his officers took their stations. "The concordate fleet just received an emergency broadcast," First Officer Park explained, her fingers dancing across her console. "Multiple attacks reported across 4 concordate worlds. They're calling it a Voidborn incursion, whatever that means." "Voidborn?" Kim asked, looking toward their alien liaison officer, a junior concordate representative named Jin, who had been assigned to the Defiance as a cultural observer, though everyone knew he was there to keep an eye on the humans. Jin's normally blue complexion had paled to an ashy gray. "They're a collective consciousness that inhabits artificial bodies. They emerge from uncharted regions beyond the galactic rim every few centuries. They harvest technological civilizations." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "The last incursion was before my great-grandparents were born." The view screen flickered as a transmission came through. Admiral Sung of the Concordate Defense Fleet, a stern figure with ridge-like protrusions along his jawline, addressed the gathered ships, all. "Vessels prepare for immediate combat operations. Non-combatants withdraw to designated safety coordinates." "This is not a drill or exercise," Kim stood straighter. "Officer Jin, please inform Admiral Sung that the Defiance offers whatever assistance we can provide." Jin looked horrified. "Captain, with all respect, your vessel would be obliterated in..." Seconds. The Voidborn technology is beyond even Concordat understanding. Before Kim could respond, the space around them seemed to twist and distort. Where empty void had been moments before, 7 ships now appeared. Smooth, black vessels with no visible propulsion systems or weapons ports. They moved with an eerie grace that defied normal physics. Concordat vessels are engaging, reported Lieutenant Su Jin from Tactical. They're firing— Wait, something's wrong. On the view screen, the mighty Concordat ships, each one dwarfing the Defiance, fired brilliant beams of energy that simply missed. Not one shot connected with the Voidborn vessels, despite the relatively close range. Their targeting systems aren't working, Su Jin said, confusion evident in her voice. It's like they can't lock onto the Voidborn ships at all. Captain Kim leaned forward. Run a full sensor sweep. I want to know everything about those ships. The bridge crew worked frantically as the battle unfolded before them. The Concordat ships, for all their technological superiority, were being systematically picked apart by weapons that seemed to phase through their advanced shielding. I've got something, Dr. Han called out from the science station. The Voidborn ships are emitting some kind of neural frequency. It's unlike anything in our database. Could that be interfering with Concordat targeting systems? Kim asked. Han nodded slowly. Possibly. Their weapons rely on quantum entanglement for targeting, far more advanced than our systems, but perhaps vulnerable to this specific frequency. Check. Our own targeting capability, Kim ordered. Su Jin's fingers flew across her console. Running simulation now. Captain, our targeting systems are tracking the Voidborn vessels perfectly. We are not affected by whatever's jamming the Concordat ships. A grim silence fell over the bridge as the implications became clear. The Defiance's primitive targeting systems, designed without the quantum entanglement technology standard in Concordat ships, could track the enemy when the advanced alien fleet could not. Open a channel to Admiral Sung, Kim ordered. When the Admiral's face appeared on screen, chaos was visible behind him, officers shouting reports, consoles sparking. Human vessel, withdraw immediately. This is not your fight. Admiral, Kim said firmly, we believe we can help. Our targeting systems are unaffected by the Voidborn jamming technology. We can track their vessels. Admiral Sung's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief to scorn in the span of seconds. Impossible. Your primitive systems couldn't possibly— With respect, Admiral, Kim interrupted. We're tracking all 7 Voidborn vessels right now. We can relay targeting data to your fleet. The Admiral stared for a long moment. Behind him, an officer shouted something about another Concordat cruiser being destroyed. Admiral, Kim pressed, let us help. Sung's expression hardened. The notion that primitives could contribute meaningfully to this fight is absurd. Withdraw. To safety coordinates or risk destruction. The transmission cut off abruptly. First Officer Park turned to Kim. Captain, what are your orders? Kim watched the view screen as another Concordat vessel erupted in a spectacular explosion. The once mighty fleet was being decimated piece by piece, unable to land a single effective hit on their opponents. Maintain position, he said quietly. Record everything, and keep our targeting solutions updated. The Admiral's pride won't matter. Much when there's no fleet left. Dr. Han looked up from his console, his expression grim. Captain, based on casualty projections and the Voidborn's current attack pattern, the Concordat fleet will be completely destroyed within 7 hours. Kim nodded, his jaw set. Then we wait. Sometimes the most difficult lesson to learn is that you need help, especially from those you've underestimated. As they watched in helpless silence, the crew of the Defiance couldn't know that their moment was approaching, faster than any of them could have predicted, a moment when humanity's primitive technology would become the galaxy's last, best hope. The Concordat fleet burned. There was no other way to describe it. From the observation deck of the Defiance, the human crew watched in somber silence as another cruiser, a vessel larger than anything Earth had ever constructed, split apart under the Voidborn assault. The enemy ships moved like predators through a school of fish, striking with terrible precision while the Concordat weapons fired uselessly into empty space. That's the 12th ship we've lost, Officer Jin said, his voice hollow. He had taken to standing on the human ship's observation deck, perhaps finding some strange comfort among the primitives, as his civilization's fleet was systematically dismantled. Captain Kim stood beside him, hands clasped tightly behind his back. 3 major colonies have fallen already? Jin nodded. Pelios Prime, Caril Station, and the Belkan homeworld, over 6 billion sentient beings. His voice cracked slightly. The Belkans were the philosophers of our coalition. They maintained the Great Library for 12,000 years. Chief Engineer Minji Park approached carrying a datapad. She hesitated, glancing at Jin before addressing her captain. The signal analysis is complete, sir. We've confirmed what Dr. Han suspected. Our targeting systems are completely unaffected by the void-borne interference. And you're certain we could provide accurate targeting data to the Concordate ships? Kim asked. Yes, sir. It's their quantum targeting that's being disrupted. Our old-fashioned tracking systems, the ones Ambassador Tay called adorably obsolete, they work just fine. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The very technology the Concordate had mocked might be the key to their survival. Before Kim could respond, the ship's communications officer rushed onto the observation deck. Captain, urgent transmission from the Concordate command vessel. Admiral Zhang is requesting to speak with you. Jin's head snapped up, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of surprise in his species. He's asking for you personally? Kim simply nodded and headed for the bridge, his officers falling in behind him. When they arrived, the main view screen showed a very different Admiral Sung than they had seen hours before. Gone was the imperious dismissal. Now the Admiral's face showed strain, with dark circles under his eyes and fresh burns visible on one side of his scaled face. Captain Kim, Sung began without preamble. Your sensors, you claimed they can track the void-borne vessels? Yes. Admiral, we've maintained consistent tracking throughout the engagement. Sung's jaw worked silently for a moment, as though physically struggling with what he needed to say. The void-borne are advancing toward the central systems, toward our homeworlds. We've lost over half our combat-capable vessels, and we cannot hit what we cannot target. He paused. The Defiance's assistance would be appreciated. Kim didn't allow himself even a flicker of satisfaction. We stand ready to help in any way possible, Admiral. Can you transmit targeting data to our remaining ships? Engineer Park stepped forward. Sir, with your permission. When Kim nodded, she addressed the Admiral directly. Admiral Sung, we can establish a targeting link, but your systems are incompatible with our data format. We would need to create an interface. How long would that take? Sung demanded. Under normal circumstances, weeks. But Park glanced at her captain, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I believe we can implement a rudimentary solution in hours. You have 3. The screen went dark, and for a moment the bridge was silent. 3 hours, Park whispered. To build a targeting interface between our technology and theirs. Kim turned to his crew. Then we'd better get started. Dr. Han, work with Engineer Park. Pull anyone you need from any department. This is now our only mission. The next 3. Hours on the Defiance were a blur of frantic activity. Engineering teams disassembled communication arrays and repurposed sensor equipment. Dr. Han and his science team worked through complex algorithms to translate the Defiance's targeting data into something the Concordate weapons could understand. The solution, when it finally emerged, wasn't elegant. In fact, it was almost laughably simple. Radio waves, Park explained to Captain Kim as they stood surrounded by hastily assembled equipment in the main cargo bay, which had been converted into an impromptu workshop. We're going to use basic radio technology to transmit the targeting data. Radio? Kim repeated. The technology we were using on Earth over 2 centuries ago? Yes, sir, Park said, unable to keep a small smile from her face. The Concordate ships don't even have radio receivers. They haven't used that technology in millennia. We had to build receivers for them using components from our shuttlecraft. 3 hours and 17 minutes after Admiral Sung's call, the Defiance moved into position at the front of what remained of the Concordate battle line. 26 Concordate ships, all that remained of a fleet that had numbered over 100, formed up behind the tiny human vessel. All Concordate ships report their receivers are online and functioning, Communications Officer Lee reported. "They're standing by for targeting data." Kim took a deep breath. "Begin transmission." What followed was something that would later be recorded in the annals of multiple civilizations. The HSS Defiance, a ship that had been the object of ridicule mere days before, became the eyes of the Concordat fleet. As the void-borne ships approached, the human vessel's primitive sensors tracked them with unwavering precision, transmitting their exact coordinates via radio waves to the waiting Concordat vessels. For the first time since the battle began, Concordat weapons found their targets. The Tarshi, first void-borne ship to be hit, seemed almost surprised. If such a thing was possible for an artificial construct, it twisted oddly as the energy beam struck it squarely midship, its smooth black surface cracking to reveal pulsing circuitry beneath. "They're vulnerable," Lieutenant Sujin called out from tactical. "Their defenses are designed to counter quantum weaponry, not direct energy impacts. Transmit that information to Admiral Sung," Kim ordered. "Tell him to concentrate fire on the midship sections where we're seeing structural weakness." The tide of battle didn't turn immediately. The Voidborn were still formidable opponents with technologies that defied understanding. But for the first time, they faced resistance. For the first time, they suffered losses. As the Defiance continued to provide targeting data, the crew couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Not pride in proving the Concordat wrong, though there was perhaps a touch of that, but pride in knowing that humanity, despite its relative youth among the stars, had something valuable to contribute. "Captain," First Officer Park said quietly, standing beside Kim as they watched the battle unfold on the main view screen. "Do you think they'll remember this, or will we go back to being the primitives once the crisis passes?" Kim watched as another Voidborn vessel shuddered under concentrated Concordat fire. "I don't know, but right now that doesn't matter. Right now we do what we came out here to do. We learn, we adapt, and we help where we can." He paused. "The galaxy may have laughed at humanity's lone ship, but they're not laughing now." As if to punctuate his words, the Voidborn vessel on screen finally broke apart, dark fragments scattering into the void. The battle raged for 17 hours without pause. On the bridge of the Defiance, the crew rotated in shifts, but Captain Kim refused to leave his post. He stood at the tactical station beside Lieutenant Su Jin, dark circles forming under his eyes as he monitored the flow of targeting data to the Concordat fleet. The ship shuddered periodically as stray energy beams grazed their hull, each impact a reminder of how precarious their position had become. "Structural integrity at 67%, reported Engineer Park from her station. Her voice was raspy from hours of shouting orders through the ship's communication system. "We've sealed off Deck 4 after the last hit. No casualties, but we can't take much more of this." The Defiance had never been designed for frontline combat. It was an exploration vessel, built for scientific discovery rather than war. Yet, here it was, positioned at the vanguard of an alien battle fleet, serving as the eyes for a civilization that had dismissed humanity as barely worth noticing just days before. "Admiral Sung is requesting an update on our status," Communications Officer Lee said, his uniform stained with coolant from an earlier repair to his console. Kim straightened his shoulders, ignoring the ache that had settled into his back. "Tell him we're operational and continuing to provide targeting data." Dr. Han looked up from his science station. "Captain, I don't think he's asking out of concern for our welfare. The Concordat command ship is taking heavy damage. They need to know if we can maintain our position." On the main view screen, the battle had taken on a desperate quality. The remaining Concordat ships fought with determination, their weapons now finding their targets, thanks to the Defiance's targeting assistance. But the Voidborn had adapted their tactics. They concentrated their attacks, overwhelming individual Concordat vessels with coordinated strikes. "New contacts," Su Jin suddenly called out, her hands flying across her console. 3 Voidborn dreadnoughts just appeared at the edge of the system. They're on an intercept course with the Concordat command vessel. The bridge fell silent as the implications became clear. The command vessel, though heavily damaged, was coordinating the entire Concordat defense. If it fell, the remaining ships would be left without leadership in the middle of a chaotic battle. "Time to intercept?" Kim asked quietly. 4 minutes, sir," Kim studied the tactical display, his mind racing through options. The Concordate command vessel was trying to retreat behind the protection of its remaining escort ships, but the Voidborn dreadnoughts were cutting through the defensive line with terrifying efficiency. "Sir," First Officer Park said softly, "there's nothing we can do. Even if we could reach them in time, the Defiance doesn't have the firepower to make a difference against those dreadnoughts." Kim continued staring at the display, then suddenly pointed to a debris field between their current position and the command vessel. "What's the composition of that debris?" Dr. Han quickly analyzed the readings. "Primarily wreckage from destroyed Concordate vessels. Some sections are still energized, with residual power signatures. Could we navigate through it?" Sujin looked startled. "Sir, those pieces are shifting unpredictably. The Concordate ships can't risk it. They're too large and would certainly collide with multiple fragments. But we're not a Concordate ship," Kim said, a plan forming in his mind. "Plot a course through that debris field. Put us between the command vessel and those dreadnoughts." The bridge crew exchanged glances of disbelief. "Captain," Engineer Park protested, "with all due respect, that's suicide. We'd be putting ourselves directly in the path of 3 Voidborn dreadnoughts." "I'm not suggesting we fight them head-on," Kim explained. "The Defiance is smaller and more maneuverable than any Concordate vessel. We can navigate that debris field and use it as cover while still providing targeting data." Understanding dawned on Sujin's face. "We present the smallest possible target profile while maintaining firing solutions, like the PT boats in Earth's Pacific naval battles." Kim nodded. "Exactly. Navigator, can you do it?" The young officer at the navigation console swallowed hard, but nodded. "Yes, sir. It'll be tight, but I believe we can thread that needle." "Execute immediately." The Defiance surged forward, its engines straining as it accelerated toward the debris field. The ship's artificial gravity fluctuated as the navigator executed a series of tight maneuvers, threading their way through twisted metal and floating fragments that had once been mighty warships. On the bridge, the crew braced themselves as the ship pitched and rolled, narrowly avoiding collisions that would have torn through their hull. Warning alarms blared continuously as sensors detected objects passing within meters of their position. "Concordate Command is hailing us," Lee reported as they emerged from the densest part of the debris field. "Admiral Sung wants to know what we're doing." "Tell him we're implementing a tactical adjustment," Kim replied, his eyes never leaving the view screen, "and that he should prepare his remaining ships to fire on our targeting coordinates." The Defiance emerged from the debris field directly in the path of the approaching Voidborn dreadnoughts, 3 massive black shapes that seemed to absorb the light around them rather than reflect it. Compared to them, the human vessel was like the minnow-facing sharks. "All power to forward shields," Kim ordered. "Weapons Officer Hyun, prepare point defense systems." Hyun looked confused. "Sir, our weapons can't penetrate their hulls." "I'm not trying to destroy them," Kim explained. "During our sensor analysis, we noticed the Voidborn deploy smaller drones before their main attack. Those drones appear to coordinate their assault pattern, target those specifically. As if on cue, the lead dreadnought released a swarm of smaller objects, each about the size of a shuttle. They moved in perfect synchronization, spreading out to surround their target. "Fire point defense systems, continuous spread," Kim ordered. The Defiance's point defense system had been designed to deal with meteor threats during interstellar travel, firing rapid pulses of energy to vaporize small objects before they could impact the hull. Now those same systems tracked and fired upon the Voidborn drones, creating a web of energy beams around the ship. To everyone's surprise, the drones began to falter as the beams struck them. Several exploded outright, while others spun away from their formation, suddenly directionless. "It's working," Hyun exclaimed. "The drones are vulnerable to our point defense system." "Continuous fire," Kim ordered, "and transmit targeting data on the drones to the Concordate fleet." As the Defiance held its position, its small but effective weapons disrupting the Voidborn attack pattern, Weapons Officer Hyun suddenly straightened in his chair. "Captain, I have an idea. Our electromagnetic pulse array, the one designed to clear debris from our flight path?" Engineer Park asked. "Yes, the Voidborn seem to operate on a neural network. Their ships, drones, everything moves with too much coordination for independent control. What if we could disrupt that network?" Kim's eyes widened slightly. Reconfigure. The EMP array immediately. Maximum power. The next few minutes were tense as Hyun and Park worked frantically to repurpose a system that had been designed for an entirely different function. Meanwhile, the Defiance continued to hold its position, absorbing hits that made the entire ship groan in protest. "Hull breach on Deck 6, someone shouted. "Emergency force fields engaged. EMP array ready," Hyun finally reported. "But sir, we'll need to be closer to the lead dreadnought for maximum effect." Kim didn't hesitate. "Take us in." The Defiance surged forward, closing the distance to the massive void-borne vessel. On the view screen, the dreadnought filled their view, its surface a disturbing void of detail, except for occasional pulses of eerie blue light that traced patterns across its hull. 500 meters, the navigator called out. 400, 300, now, Kim ordered. The electromagnetic pulse fired, not a visible beam, but a wave of energy that rippled outward from the Defiance. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a puppet with its strings cut, the drones surrounding the dreadnought suddenly stopped moving in formation. They drifted, colliding with each other, some powering down entirely. Most importantly, the dreadnought itself shuddered, visibly, the patterns of light on its hull flickering and dying in sections. "It worked," Dr. Han exclaimed. "Their neural network is disrupted." "Transmit targeting data to the Concordate fleet," Kim ordered. "All available ships, concentrate fire on the lead dreadnought's midsection where the EMP had the strongest effect." The remaining Concordate vessels didn't waste the opportunity. Energy beams lanced out from multiple directions, all converging on the spot the Defiance had identified. The void-borne dreadnought, its defenses compromised by the unexpected electromagnetic attack, could not withstand the concentrated firepower. Fissures appeared along its hull, spreading like cracks in ice, before the entire vessel seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself before erupting in a silent explosion that sent fragments. In all directions the tide had turned. The remaining void-borne vessels, suddenly facing coordinated resistance they couldn't counter, began to withdraw. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, victory seemed possible. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Kim finally allowed himself to sit down, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. Around him, his crew worked with renewed energy, tracking the retreating enemy ships and continuing to provide targeting data to their Concordate allies. "Captain," First Officer Park said quietly, stepping to his side. "That was... I don't even have words for what you just did." Kim looked up at her, exhaustion etched in every line of his face, but with a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I believe the phrase you're looking for, First Officer, is not too bad for primitives. When the final void-borne ship vanished into the darkness of space, no one on the Defiance had the energy to cheer. They had been fighting for 23 straight hours. The bridge crew sat or stood at their stations, staring at the main view screen with the blank expressions of people who had pushed themselves far beyond exhaustion. The ship itself was barely holding together. The Defiance floated amid the wreckage of what had been the most intense space battle in recent galactic history. Its hull breached in 17 places, life support systems functioning at minimal capacity, and the main engines offline. Emergency. Repair crews worked throughout the vessel, their voices crackling over the comm system as they fought to keep critical systems running. "Status report," Captain Kim requested, his voice hoarse from hours of giving orders. Engineer Park looked up from her console, her face streaked with grime and what might have been dried blood from a cut above her eye. "We've sealed the worst. Hull breaches. Life support is stable on all occupied decks. Main engines are offline, but we have maneuvering thrusters. Weapon systems are completely depleted," Dr. Han added from his station. 17 crew members injured, 6 seriously, but no fatalities. Medical bay is at capacity. Kim nodded slowly, taking in the information. "And the Concordate fleet? 38% of their vessels survived," Lieutenant Sujin reported. "The command ship sustained heavy damage, but remains operational. Admiral Sung is coordinating recovery efforts." First Officer Park moved to stand beside the captain's chair. "Sir, the Concordate vessels are forming up around us. Their formation is unusual." On the view screen, the remaining Concordate ships, some, nearly as damaged as the Defiance, were indeed arranging themselves in a pattern around the human vessel. They formed a perfect circle, with the Defiance at the center. Communications Officer Lee looked up from his console, confusion evident on his tired face. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission from Admiral Sung. He's requesting permission to come aboard." A murmur of surprise went through the bridge crew. In all their months among the Concordat, no senior official had ever requested to visit the primitive human vessel. Kim straightened in his chair, wincing slightly at the pain in his back. "Permission granted. Have a security detail escort him from the shuttle bay." 20 minutes later, the bridge doors slid open to admit Admiral Sung, accompanied by 2 of his officers. The Admiral looked as exhausted as the humans, with fresh burn marks visible along one side of his scaled face, and his ornate uniform torn and discolored. He stopped just inside the doorway, his gaze moving slowly around the bridge, taking in the damaged consoles, the exposed wiring, and the exhausted crew. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Admiral Sung bowed deeply before Captain Kim. It was not a small nod of acknowledgement, but a full formal bow, the kind of gesture that, in Concordat culture, was reserved for moments of profound respect or gratitude. "Captain Kim of Earth," the Admiral said, his translator rendering his words in slightly stilted English, "the Concordat owes you and your crew a debt that cannot be measured." Kim, too surprised to immediately respond, slowly rose from his chair. Protocol suggested he should return the bow, which he did, though not as deeply due to his injuries. "Admiral Sung, we did only what any sentient beings would do when faced with a common threat." The Admiral straightened. "No, Captain. You did what we could not, what we would not." He gestured to the officers beside him. "My senior staff has analyzed the battle data. Your vessel, which we dismissed as primitive, was the decisive factor in our victory." One of the Admiral's officers, a being with translucent skin through which complex circulatory patterns were visible, stepped forward. "Your point defense systems neutralized 63% of the void-borne drones. Your electromagnetic pulse disabled their neural network coordination, which our scientists had been unable to even identify, let alone counter, and your targeting assistance accounted for 87% of our successful hits." "We misjudged you," Admiral Sung said, and there seemed to be genuine regret in his voice. "Your species' supposed primitiveness was precisely what saved us all. Your solutions were unexpected, different, and therefore the Voidborn could not adapt to them." Kim glanced around at his crew, who were watching the exchange with varying degrees of amazement. "Admiral, we're grateful for your acknowledgement, but our ship requires extensive repairs before we can return to Earth." "Return to Earth?" The Admiral seemed genuinely puzzled. "Captain Kim, perhaps I have not made myself clear. The Concordat fleet surrounds your vessel in the formation of honor, a tradition dating back 12,000 years, reserved for those who have rendered extraordinary service to our civilization." He paused. "The consensus of species has voted unanimously to offer humanity full membership in the Galactic Concordat, effective immediately." A stunned silence fell over the bridge. Full membership in the Galactic Concordat was something the diplomatic team hadn't expected to achieve for decades, if ever. "That's a generous offer," Kim said carefully, "but such a decision would require consultation with Earth's governments." "Of course," the Admiral agreed. "But know that it is more than an offer. It is our acknowledgement that we were wrong about humanity. Your perspective, shaped by millennia of adaptation and overcoming limitations, provided approaches to problems that we, with all our advanced technology, could not conceive." Over the following weeks, as the Defiance underwent repairs in a Concordat shipyard, the full impact of their actions began to unfold. Earth received the news with astonishment and pride. Diplomatic channels that had barely existed before suddenly hummed with activity as humanity and the Concordat began the process of integration. The HSS Defiance became the template for a new class of vessels, hybrid ships incorporating both human ingenuity and alien technology. Engineers from both civilizations worked side by side, learning from each other's approaches. The first joint project was upgrading the Defiance itself, maintaining its unique human design elements, while enhancing its capabilities with Concordat technology. Captain Kim stood in the observation lounge of the newly refitted Defiance, watching, as shuttles ferried personnel and supplies between ships. Beside him stood Ambassador Tay, the same blue-skinned, four-armed being who had once dismissed Earth as barely worth cataloguing. "I've been assigned as the Concordat liaison to Earth," Tay said, his demeanor notably different from their first meeting. "It seems fitting, given my initial assessment of your species." Kim smiled slightly. "We all make mistakes, Ambassador." "Indeed, though few mistakes are recorded so prominently in the historical archives." Tay gestured to a datapad he carried. "My official report on the Voidborn conflict has been entered into the Concordat's permanent records. I believe you might appreciate the concluding paragraph." He handed the datapad to Kim, who read the alien text that scrolled automatically through its translation program. The galaxy laughed at humanity's lone ship until it entered the fight. Now we stand humbled by the lesson that true advancement comes not from technological superiority alone, but from the courage to face overwhelming odds with whatever tools one has at hand. Perhaps it is not despite their youth among the stars, but because of it, that humans bring such valuable perspective to our ancient coalition. Their inclusion marks not charity but necessity. For what use is 12,000 years of knowledge if it blinds us to new ways of seeing? In humanity, we have found not the primitives we expected, but the partners we needed. Kim handed the datapad back, unexpectedly moved by the words. "That's quite an evolution in your thinking, Ambassador." Tay made a gesture that his translator identified as indicating deep sincerity. "The true primitives, Captain Kim, are those who cannot recognize when they are wrong." As the Defiance prepared for its next mission, this time as an official vessel of the Galactic Concordat, Kim couldn't help but reflect on how quickly everything had changed. Just months ago, humanity had been the galaxy's newcomers, looking up at the stars with more questions than answers. Now they stood as equals among civilizations that had been crossing the void for millennia. It wasn't technology that had earned them their place, nor military might or economic power. It was perspective, the unique human gift for adapting, for finding solutions where others saw only problems, for looking at the old with new eyes. The galaxy had indeed laughed at humanity's lone ship, but no one was laughing now.